And Shantae, you're doing social media?
I can't, I don't have the button thing.
I'll do it. I can do it.
All right.
Okay.
Sounds good. Good morning. If you're just joining us, we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. We'll let people log in before we get started. If you're just joining us, we'll be getting underway in just a moment. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Garrett Sheehan. I'm President and CEO of the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce and Quinnipiac Chamber of Commerce. Today's webinar topic, the state of Black businesses, Black Wall Street 100 years ago, and where we are now. Before we get underway, I do want to thank all of our sponsors that support us doing our webinars here, but start with the Diversity and Inclusion Council presented by the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce. That's the program that we'll be putting on today. We also are supported by Avangrid with UI, Southern Connecticut Gas, and Connecticut Natural Gas, and all of our investors here in the chamber who support us throughout the year. You can see their logos scrolling on the screen in front of you. We do have a very good program, and as I mentioned, our Diversity and Inclusion Council helps us put this together. And so I want to welcome in Cecil Austin. I don't believe we have Jean, but Jean is also our co-chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Council along with Cecil. And I'll welcome in Cecil. Good morning, Cecil.
Good morning, everyone. My name is, just to say again, my name is Cecil Austin. I'm owner of CNH Insurance and co-chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Council. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining and thank the Chamber for allowing us to focus on putting on some very constructive conversation. And I'm looking forward to it. And thanks again, all the panelists that are joining.
Great, thank you, Cecil.
Thank you.
And I'll just let people know you can join in with the Diversity and Inclusion Council. Jesse Phillips, many of you know Jesse, reach out to him. We can have his email in the chat. And if you're interested in getting involved with our Diversity and Inclusion Council, please reach out to him or Cecil or Jean. We've had more and more people being a part of it, and it's been a great, really the programming has been incredible that we've been able to put out from the Diversity and Inclusion Council. Well, let's get into our topic now, and February is Black History Month, and so we are very pleased to have the Honorable Judge Clifton Graves, a probate judge in New Haven County, and Charles E. Warner Jr., Chairman of the Connecticut Freedom Trail. And gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. I know you're going to give us a lot of great historical perspective this morning. I'll just start off by saying, and a thank you again to Charles, who helped us out last fall when we were doing our annual awards. And for the first time, we renamed our Community Leadership Award to the William Lanson Community Leadership Award. And if you were watching that day, Charles narrated a great video that we had just kind of explaining the tremendous impact that William had on New Haven. And really the story of a Black entrepreneur. And when you have opportunity and access, anything is possible, great success is possible, but when that is taken away, then there's no opportunity. And so I'll leave that as our lead-in, Charles and Clifton, for you to take our conversation.
Sure, well, thank you. Thank you very much for having us, and thank you for allowing me to share our storied history. And, you know, I always say that Black history is America's history, and definitely in New Haven, New Haven's Black history is for all of New Haven. It's tied into the direct story of the development of the city. So thank you for having us.
Let me chime in and also thank Garrett, Ray, Shantae, Jesse, Cecil, and Diversity and Inclusion Council, and the entire chamber for extending this opportunity to us. Let me just add on, in addition to serving as a judge for this New Haven County, I've been teaching African American history at Gateway for over 20 years, which is been an avocation of mine. And so this is right up my alley, and I thank you for the opportunity to share share information and knowledge. Because again, as Charles has indicated, African American history is American history. That's been far too long marginalized, distorted, even lied about. And so to try to share this information is important for all of us.
Well, thank you, Clifton. And in talking with you guys, we're going to start talking about the history of Dixwell, and so I'll let you share your screen there.
All right, I'm gonna defer to Charles, and let me just say quickly how proud I am of Charles Warner Jr. I've actually known him all of his life, and proud of the fact that he has grown and matured into the scholar, to the historian, to the educator, and advocate. And so I'm proud to share this presentation with him. Charles, you start with Dixwell. Yeah.
So the title of today's presentation on the Dixwell portion is New Haven's Dixwell Community, Business, Bibles, Ballots, and Beauty. Next slide, please. So we just talked about William Lanson just a bit, and it's important that we bring up Lanson when we talk about African-American entrepreneurship and business, and really the development of business in the city of New Haven. We definitely have to include William Lanson. Although he was not a resident of the Dixwell area, and his businesses were not centered in that area, he definitely had ties to the area. The Farmington Canal, which William Lanson oversaw the construction of, well, at least the 30-mile portion from the New Haven Harbor north, goes by the Dixwell area. And next screen, please. You can see here the statue of William Lanson standing not far from the Farmington Canal. This site is right behind the new Pauli Murray residential colleges at Yale. And honestly, there is no real demarcation between this site and the Dixwell community. So William Lanson did have some direct contact with the area. And also, next slide, please. He was a founder of the African Ecclesiastical Society, which was the forerunner to what you see here is the Temple Street Congregational Church. And then you'll see how Temple Street, although that is not in the Dixwell area, ends up popping up and making an impact on Dixwell Avenue. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the population of the African Americans in New Haven. We see that in 1850, there were only 989 African Americans counted in the city through the census. By 1930, the population was over 5,000. But if you see there in that 5,000 count, you have half in the Dixwell area. So there's a huge concentration of African Americans to not only establish businesses, but most importantly, patronize the businesses. Next. Here's a map of New Haven, old New Haven, in particular relating to sites related to African Americans. There's an area at the top left portion of the map, and there's a section there called Poverty Square, and that would be in the area today, Sperry Street, Gulf Street, not Dixwell, but Dixwell adjacent, and definitely should be tied in when we're talking about housing and social life and the business life of the literal Dixwell Avenue area. Next. So the story of Dixwell Avenue, and Judge Graves, I'm sure you can attest to this, really starts with the anchoring of the churches that are there. In particular, this is Varick AME Zion Church. And Varick, although Dixwell Church gets credit in most sources for being the oldest Black church in the city, Varick was founded in 1818. Dixwell Congregational Church was founded in 1820 formally. And so Varick definitely had a presence there. And you see here, Dixwell is 100 Dixwell Avenue. By this time, Dixwell had moved from Temple Street, being Temple Street Congregational, and now Dixwell Congregational Church. And that move happened in 1888. And Judge Graves, you've been here in New Haven how long?
Over 50 years.
And so would you be able to tell me personally how your relationship to the faith-based community actually ties into you being here?
For sure. Well, let me just add just quickly, and thank Charles for that. It's important, folks, to know that TBS just did a two-part series, some of you may have seen, on the Black church. And it highlighted the fact that the Black church historically was the center point of the African-American community. So a lot of businesses actually emerged from and were started in the Black church. That was the only building, the only facility that Black folks owned and felt comfortable in. And so you had insurance companies, banks, credit unions, all other types of businesses actually being formed and merged in the Black churches. So in Dixwell Avenue, UCC, and Varick were no different. A lot of the leadership of the African American community, social leadership, political leadership, business leadership, came from, in large part, those two churches. There were others that certainly Emmanuel Baptist and others in time that also emerged, but these two, because of the historic presence there in the Dixwell area, right across the street from each other, literally, and contributed greatly to supporting businesses. My direct connection, my family, and by the way, I have to thank my sister Kathy Graves for helping make this happen. Reverend Edmonds, Dr. Edmonds, who was an iconic figure in this community for over 40 years, was pastor of Dixwell Avenue United Church of Christ, and actually recruited my father, who was his good friend, to come to work here in some economic development initiatives that the church was undergoing. The church had an economic development fund to assist small businesses, women businesses get started. They had a housing development corporation run out of the church that would purchase homes and rehab them and then rent them out to low income folks. These are initiatives that Reverend Edmonds undertook at the church back in the 60s. So, but this is part of the historic tradition of the African American church, not just here in New Haven, but throughout the country.
Absolutely. Next slide, please. You can see another. This is another iconic building on Dixwell Avenue. Another church, St. Martin de Porres, the Catholic church, and these. There are a number of churches in the Dixwell area, as you know, if you drive up and down the street. Historically, it was the same. But these churches that we are showing just give you a glimpse of some of the, what I call the anchoring institutions of the lower Dixwell corridor. Next. Now, if one were to take a stroll, a walk, or a drive down Dixwell Avenue through the years, and you just kind of wanted to get a sense of what kind of businesses were there, you'd have everything from restaurants. Two very well-known are the Home System Cafe and the Chick Harris Restaurant. And let me point out that the Chick Harris Restaurant was very important to the Dixwell community because Black people were not really able to find fine dining downtown and other areas of the city. So the Chick Harris Restaurant was one where you could go have a nice meal with a nice tablecloth, and the waitresses were said to be kind and the most hospitable. You also have transportation businesses, the Black and White Cab Company, founded by Bill Webb, and you also have an even older transportation company, James Elsey, who had a Model T Ford, had what he called a jitney service. Yep, thank you. Also, you have varied businesses from freight, McLean Trucking, that did really large hauling business and eventually was absorbed by a larger trucking firm. You have welding, John Stufert's Welding Company, which provided big service to the New Haven busing transportation system, extending the chassis for the buses. So that company got a nice large contract, did good work. In terms of grocery stores, you had the Excel Market. Grocery stores didn't last long in the community because they didn't, well, Black-owned ones decided not to extend credit. They were working definitely on receiving cash on delivery. And so white competitors who were economically advantaged to be able to accept and work on credit tended to be able to stay and get more business because people needed to purchase on credit. Also, you have a very iconic New Haven institution, Unique Boutique, with the Huckabee family that has not only had a presence in the Dixwell Avenue business sector, but also downtown on Chapel Street, and still has a presence. You also have a very well-known Dixwell iconic institution, the Curry Confectionery. They invented varied types of delicious candy that apparently they had the special recipe for. And it was so good that they contracted, their candy was requested to be sold in stores all over the city. Interesting point, again, inequality, disadvantage pops up. Some of these deliveries had to be done through the back door and after hours so that white patrons were not aware that the candy they were purchasing from whatever store they were purchasing the candy from actually was being made by African Americans. Also, this business had 2 locations on Dixwell and was really a presence from about 1919 to 1950. And then we have Sam Speed, a bail bondsman who was illiterate and, rode around on a bicycle, but Sam Speed was thought to be one of the wealthiest Blacks in New Haven at the time that he was riding around. And here we have a picture of the Curry Confectionery. And this is at its second site. We also have varied businesses like pharmacies, the Holly family. We all know the well-known OBGYN, Dr. Marshal Holly, his father, who also had a medical degree, was the proprietor of an apothecary, a drugstore, and named after the family Hollies. And then we also have another African-American team of Davis and Waller, who later had a pharmacy on Dixwell Avenue. Funeral services, for sure. There were 3 that did big business historically on Dixwell Avenue. The oldest being Brown and Baker, 2 gentlemen, Mr. Brown and Mr. Baker, partnered up. And then sometime later, the Keys, who had a funeral home in Waterbury, moved right onto Dixwell Avenue and had a presence on Dixwell Avenue, as you can see here, for 80 years in a beautiful building. Top-notch service. We also have, and mind you, Lower Dixwell Avenue is really not that long, but in that short stretch of space, you had everything from funeral homes, churches, community centers to jazz clubs. And here we have a picture of Rufus Greenlee, who was a vaudeville star, and in the 30s opened up the Monterey Club. And the Monterey Club was not only a outstanding presence on Dixwell Avenue in terms of entertainment and respite, if you will, but it also was an institution and the proliferation and the enjoyment of jazz music. And many top-notch jazz stars through the ages popped into the Monterey and played, and even albums were recorded, even as recently, I guess, the 1960s inside the Monterey. We also had a number of New Haven's Black medical practitioners practice in that Dixwell Avenue corridor. Many of them worked, interestingly enough, you would think they'd be competitors, but they were really working with each other. And, some of them had the foresight to, it was important for them to also own the buildings many times in the spaces that they worked in. And so you have a list of people here. Some of us, know these people personally from our memory, starting with Dr. Porter, who was a graduate of Yale Medical School in the late 1800s. He would probably be the oldest one in terms of his profession on this list. And Dr. Porter served New Haven clients, Black and white, and not only in the Dixwell community, but he definitely was a presence flying around in his very interesting car. Then you also have others like Herman Scott and Dr. Pitts, and you have, let's see here, you have Dr. Massey, and you have Dr. Gilmer, and these are all people who had gone to historically Black colleges and universities a lot of times for undergrad. Right, Dr. Esdale for sure, and others, the Downings, the brothers, the Downings, and others who practice in various spots in the New Haven community. But these men were not only leaders in the medical field, but in the community work as well. This is a very special, outstanding piece here. This focuses on Charles Tribbett, who was a Yale graduate with a degree in electrical engineering. And again, inequality rears its head because he was Black. He had a very hard time finding work as an electrical engineer and ended up doing work as an electrician and other and wiring. And Charles Tribbett not only is an iconic figure on Dixwell Avenue for being the proprietor of the Standard Electric company, he also was a widely known figure throughout the United States, a veteran of World War I, where he also was a civil rights activist in Oklahoma. He was pulled off of a train in uniform for not being in a Jim Crow car, and he decided that he'd rather go to jail than to give in to inequality. And, he was a very good friend. This letter is actually to W.E.B. Du Bois, and he's writing Dr. Du Bois saying that he would not be able to join him at a Pan-African conference. But Charles Tribbett is really a top-notch guy who deserves more attention. Next slide, please. And here we have a picture of the Hannah Gray home. And the Hannah Gray home was established by a washerwoman who saved her money and donated her money so that the indigent, older African-American people with no family had somewhere to go. And over the years, the community took it on as a project. The people in Dixwell, this was like their baby. And it's a source of pride for me because the institution still exists today, and that house is, you can drive down Dixwell Avenue now and still see the structure. And this is a picture of the Women's 20th Century Club. These women were basically the fundraisers and the movers and shakers of the African-American community, definitely had a strong presence in the Dixwell area. They were not only wives of important men, but they were also women who used their position to embody the motto of lifting as they climb. And the reason why they're placed in this presentation right after Hannah Gray home is because many of their efforts were to raise funds for Hannah Gray through musicals and fairs and whist parties. And here we have a picture of some very important Dixwell Avenue historical figures with Jackie Robinson standing in the center. In the picture, we have Dr. Fred Smith and Dr. Charles Twyman, who we don't have schools pop up in this presentation because it's really circled around business, but schools are important to the lifeblood, the social life, which ties into business community. And Dr. Twyman was New Haven's first Black principal and then became an assistant superintendent, a longtime New Haven figure. We also have the wife of the pastor of Dixwell Church, Relia Ledbetter, who was the wife of Dr. Theodore Ledbetter. And we also have Dr. Carter Marshall, who I didn't mention with the medical professionals, but who was a nationwide social figure and fraternity man and top-notch physician. Here's a picture of the men's club of the Dixwell Avenue Congregational Church. And this picture is important because this picture takes place in 1957, about around the time that real redevelopment was getting ready to start, and the pickup of the civil rights movement. In the lower right-hand corner at the bottom, the last gentleman there is the Reverend Dr. Edwin Edmonds, who came to the New Haven as a part of a migration of sorts from the South. He came to be the pastor at Dixwell Church, and he led civil rights movements and economic justice movements and housing movements, and just basically speaking up for human rights in the city. And so these men, in their own right, these individuals were leaders in the community, really helped to drive redevelopment forward, but to make sure that Dixwell, the Dixwell area got a piece of the pie. And Cliff Graves, his dad, upon arrival, joined this coterie and hopped in, not only leading with his knowledge, but putting his money on the line and establishing his own businesses. And Judge Graves, if you could, can you just give us a brief history about some of the
Sure.
work that was going on?
Well, yeah, and let me just say, and thank you, Charles, again. You're doing, listen, as much as I think I know, I've learned a lot from you today. I hope everyone else has too. So in any event, just quickly on Dr. Edmonds, Dr. Reverend Edmonds, again, as I mentioned earlier, an iconic figure in this community. He was pastor of the Dixwell Church. In addition to that, he was professor of sociology at Southern for 35 years. In addition to the things that Charles talked about, being very active through his church position as a community advocate, well respected, and pushing for economic development, business development, social development. I mentioned earlier the Housing Development Corporation and the Economic Development Corporation that emanated from the church. There was also a daycare center in the church, a creative arts center running out of the church. The idea to reach out to the community in various ways. And of course, you mentioned my father was involved as head of the Housing Development Corporation to purchase again housing and rent them out to low income folk. But the whole idea was to push for business development, economic development, and to assist and coordinate those efforts with the various entities in the community, as well as downtown, the governments, local and state governments. So Dr. Edmonds is someone that we certainly should pay homage to. And it's important to know in terms of the economic connection, just for those in the chamber, his daughter, Toni Edmonds Walker, is the chairperson of the State House of Representatives Appropriations Committee. So just so you know. So the legacy continues with his daughter, his youngest daughter, Toni Edmonds Walker, chair of the Appropriations Committee for the state of Connecticut House of Representatives. So we want to give him his props and her props as well.
And that's a good point, because again, business is the focus, but that ties into the ballot. And these men were able to, because of the concentration of African Americans in the community, they were able to elect people to the Board of Aldermen. You have people like the attorney Harry Tolliver, who was the first African American elected to the Board of Aldermen. Prior to that, New Haven ran on a city council system. Again, you have a gentleman by the name of Charles McGlynn, who did not live in the Dixwell corridor, but was elected as the first African American to the city council. But he did attend a church at the Dixwell Congregational Church and was very active in the Dixwell community. And you have people like George Crawford, Attorney Crawford, and Attorney Early Capel, people who really worked their knowledge of the law in tandem with the business community to make headway with the ballot.
Yes.
Next slide, please. And then here we have a picture of, you can't talk about Dixwell without something like this structure, like the Q House. You have to talk about the development, the impact of the Dixwell Community Center, Dixwell Community House, affectionately known as the Q House, which started further down the street in the area today, closer to where St. Martin de Porres is now. And the reason why this comes up at this portion of the presentation is because those men we just saw were priming redevelopment and making sure money came towards Dixwell. And this building here was a result of their efforts. There was a plan to redevelop the Dixwell area. As a part of that, the keystone piece would be the Dixwell Q House, the new Dixwell Congregational Church, and the Dixwell Plaza where the Stetson Library now sits. These were to be an anchor for the entire community. If you think about it this way, and this is not official, but I mean, it makes sense to me. It focuses on changing the community by dealing with the head. You have Stetson Library, full of books. You have the hands. Here at the Dixwell Community Center, there was all kind of recreation. There was a wonderful play group known throughout the nation in the African-American theater circuit that developed out of here. And then so you have the head, the hands, and then you have Dixwell Church, the new building, the heart. So they were looking to really develop the total Dixwell community in the 60s when this project took place. The architect was John Johansson, a very famous architect from Harvard, who designed this building and the Dixwell Church, the Plaza, and the Florence Virtue Homes, which were some of the, it was a resulting work from the housing corporation that Judge Graves was talking about.
Yes.
Here we have a picture of Dr. Fred Smith and his wife, Minnie, at the announcement of the One Dixwell Plaza apartment complex. It was actually mixed use apartment and like building use space. As a part of the redevelopment, Dr. Smith was given the opportunity or offered the opportunity to produce some quality housing. Again, it's been an issue for Blacks in New Haven since the beginning, fair and clean, good housing. And so he and his wife basically risked their retirement savings to develop the housing. Unfortunately, over time, it was mismanaged by the management company, and the residents didn't take good care of it. There were about 4 fires, like one after another, and the building went into disrepair at a loss to the Smiths. And then eventually in the 90s, it was demolished. But Dr. Smith was also, again, a medical doctor, but a leader in the community. And he was pivotal in the creation of the Freddie Fixer Parade along with Ed Grant. And here we have the Stetson Library, which is a representation of the businesses in the plaza across the street from the Q House. And again, a main cog in the business life of the community. This was supposed to be a place where you could live, pray, shop, learn, and raise a family, all there in Dixwell.
Charles?
Yeah, sure.
Let me just interject. Since we're on Dixwell Avenue with the Stetson Library and the Q House, I'm sure those on this who are listening to this webinar are aware of the fact that the Concord, which is headed by, well, at least Carlton Highsmith, who's a member of the chamber, is an integral part of the Concord, which just recently purchased the Dixwell Plaza as part of the Dixwell Avenue revitalization, economic revitalization. And the whole idea is to have businesses there. I think moderate to low income housing, and it's just a whole part of the whole idea to revitalize Dixwell Avenue, tying into the new Q House, and the Stetson Library actually be moved into the new Q House. So there is in terms of economic development and revitalization, it's important for at least the chamber to know this economic development initiative is taking place right now in the Dixwell area.
And so we have a picture of modern day Dixwell Avenue with the picture of Dixwell Congregational Church across from the church. As someone pointed out, is the Cornell Scott Health Center, still taking up the place of those early Black practitioners for providing for the health and medical needs of the community. Definitely want to mention Cornell Scott. Health Center. Also, if you can see in the next slide, I'll tell you, great minds think alike. Judge Graves is right on top of it. Next slide, please. We have the future, the possible future of the Dixwell corridor. This here is a rendering of the what could be if all comes into fruition for Concord. And recently, plans were approved to move forward with the next stages of development. And again, this harkens back to the African Americans of the community who were involved in the community, lived, prayed, worked there, taking the responsibility for the development. And you have people like Carlton Highsmith and Paul McCraven and Eric Clemens and others involved, hoping to develop good housing and recreation and just a place to help to further development, further develop the Dixwell community. So all these pictures and all the information comes from local sources. New Haven has done a great job about cataloging the history of the city, and thankfully that involves the Dixwell corridor, Yale Daily News, the Ethnic Heritage Center at Yale. And the reason why I'm calling these places out, these are all New Haven institutions, and in line with the Chamber's goal of developing New Haven business, we should definitely, make sure that we patronize our local businesses. I would say that if we're going to talk about Dixwell, we would talk about learning, love, and legacy. Judge Graves?
Yes, sir. And let me just hasten to add, and thank you so much, Charles, for that. I'm sure everyone appreciates it. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention the contributions of Gerald Clark. Gerald Clark founded the Greater New Haven Business and Professional Association, as some of you know, over 50 years ago. Thankfully, he's still around, but he's retired, of course, but his mark and his legacy, since Charles just mentioned legacy, someone we should certainly acknowledge and show his appreciation for helping develop, encourage the development, mentoring, and sponsoring so many startup businesses in the Greater New Haven area for over 50 years. So just Gerald Clark certainly deserves some recognition and acknowledgement.
And that brings me to another point. A topic this large really can't be properly delved into in a short amount of time, especially with other things on the agenda. The Dixwell story alone would need so much more time. There are so many more people who we did not name and feature in this presentation who left a mark on the community, from the schools to the businesses, housing, to people who just tended to the sick and children who needed parenting. There are so many people who contributed to the development of Dixwell.
Charles, that was great. Learned so much more about Dixwell, and having that background helps us moving forward. I know the next topic we want to talk about is Black Wall Street, which is not here in Connecticut, but going out to Oklahoma and learning some of the lessons from there. So we'll bring up those slides. Correct.
Okay.
Can you take it from there, Clifton?
Okay. Yes. Well, again, let me thank Charles and thank you all again. So this piece, I think we selected Black Wall Street to focus in on for obvious reasons. At the time of its development, it was the most prosperous and successful African American community in this country, and this is in the early 1900s, leading up to 1921. So this year marks the 100th anniversary, sadly, of the massacre, the riot, if you will, that actually wiped out, destroyed Black Wall Street, and there will be a big commemoration, not celebration, a commemoration later on this year. As part of the economic revitalization of Black Wall Street. But just quickly, in terms of the slides that you have in front of you, I'm seeing, which one do we have? So you should show the Greenwood District. The Greenwood District was basically a section of Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Black Wall Street emerged and evolved. Essentially, the backdrop was that the people ask the question all the time: how do these Black people get to Oklahoma? Well, there were two parts to that. One was that under through the Trail of Tears, which was a governmental policy that for Indian, quote unquote, Indian removal initiated by President Jackson in the 1800s, late 1800s, was to move the native peoples, indigenous folks from the Carolinas and Georgia to the Midwest, so to make room for economic development for white settlers. And so part of that movement of Native Americans also included African Americans, some of whom actually were slaves. That's the part of history we don't talk about a lot, but there were some native tribes, indigenous peoples actually had African slaves. And so they were part of the Trail of Tears. That was one piece of it in terms of how African Americans got to Oklahoma. The other second piece, though, more importantly, was that in the aftermath of the Civil War, African Americans in Arkansas and Texas and Louisiana wanted to get out of the throes of the South. Oklahoma was not a state; it was territory, and the government was encouraging settlers to come develop the land and make it profitable. So Black folks took advantage of that, and scores of African Americans moved to Oklahoma, settled land there, and in fact, Oklahoma, to this day, there are 13 all Black towns still existed in Oklahoma. There were more than that at the turn of the century, or the 20th century, but right now there are 13 all Black towns settled by Black people, run by Black folks, economic development, politically, the whole 9 yards, presently still in Oklahoma. Tulsa was not one. Tulsa was a predominantly white city, but the section of Greenwood became very profitable because Tulsa itself became an oil capital. Oklahoma became noted for its oil production and the refinery. So a lot of Black folks came there for jobs, but then in time, over a period of time, it became a mecca. And so as a result of that, Black Wall Street became very, very prominent and profitable. So at one time, you had property, doctor, you had, similar to what Charles talked about in New Haven, you had schools of African-American doctors, lawyers who settled there. There were all type of Black businesses. You had Black hotels, music theater, skating rink, bus and cab services, banks, credit unions, insurance companies, schools, etc. All established run by African Americans. It was documented that during the heyday of Black Wall Street, the dollar, and you economic folks, I don't know if you can appreciate this, the dollar turned over 36 times in Black Wall Street before it left. 36 times. Now, compared to my understanding, if someone can help me out on this, but my understanding of today in most African-American communities around the country, the dollar barely turns over once before it leaves the community and goes into somebody else's hands. So you can see the disparity and how, in terms of where we are now, so we were then. But the point that you can see how Black Wall Street was able to develop and prosper because the money stayed in the Black community. And it led to employment and certainly the wealth that emerged. And so you had prominent folks. I think as we go through the slides, I guess I guess we want to start. Well, okay. Let me just take a minute here. Do we have the one? I guess. Who's next? Okay, yeah, we got Jackson. Let's go to the next one, please. Okay, this is the map. This is the map of the Exodus. Can we go to the next one, please? Next slide. Okay. Again, this is part of the Exodus again. I'm ahead of myself. Just the Trail of Tears. And the next one, please. One more, please.
Hey, Judge.
Yes, sir.
That picture of the wagon train and these folks here were a part of that group of people you talked about who left,
yes.
Not with the trail, but after, when there were open claims on the land.
Yes, in terms of the settlers and the Sooners. That's why some of you may know if you follow Oklahoma sports, the nickname for Oklahoma University is the Sooners. And the idea was that those who got there sooner, they got a chance to stake their claims in the land. And there were scores of African Americans who were part of that, those Sooners who helped establish land claims in Oklahoma. and became Black homesteaders. Next, please. Okay, Bass Reeves, just quickly. Let's go back to the first one first. Bass Reeves was the first African-American to be appointed United States Deputy Marshal west of the Mississippi, appointed by Federal Judge Parker out of Arkansas. And he's noted in fame. He made over 3,000 arrests. He was just a notorious lawman. And some people in some circles argue that his story, Bass Reeves, was the basis for the Lone Ranger. Some of you are old enough to remember the Lone Ranger, the television show. It was a radio show, then a television show, then a movie in recent years. But the argument, of course, it wasn't a black man that portrayed it, but the argument by some historians is that Bass Reeves' life story was really the basis for the Lone Ranger, just FYI. But he was a great lawman and a great figure in Oklahoma and Arkansas territories at the time. Next, please. And this picture, just quick, this on a personal note, this is U.S. Deputy Marshal from second from your right is Neely Factory, who is my great-grandfather. My sister Kathy and I, our great-grandfather, our mother's grandfather. Grandpa Neely was also a United States Deputy Marshal appointed by Judge Parker, who served actually not alongside Bass Reeves, but during the same time Bass Reeves served. And this group that's in front of you is Grandpa Neely's posse, and it was 2 African Americans, a Caucasian, and a Native American, indigenous folk. You can't get more diverse than that in that period of time. And they worked together. They were all partners, and they were part of a posse. They worked together, and I think it's instructive that this is at the turn of the century, and turn of the 20th century, and you have 2 black men, a white man, and a Native American working together alongside one another, having each other's back. That's something we could learn from today.
In the name of the law, too.
Yes, exactly. In the name of the law, yeah. Grandpa Neely, I never met my Grandpa Neely. He died 2 weeks after I was born, but my mother tells me that he did hold me in his arms and after I was born, and said to my mother that this boy's going to be something one day. So I'm still trying to get there, Grandpa. I'm still trying to get there. Anyway, but Grandpa Neely, just a sidebar there. The next one, I guess, let me see. Yeah, it's important to know. Signing of Oklahoma's Jim Crow laws. This is, again, the aftermath, the turn of the century, after Oklahoma becomes a state. There was. You should know this in terms of Oklahoma. There was a man named Mr. McCabe, Ed McCabe, who actually was one of the first settlers, was very politically active. He had actually advocated that Oklahoma become a state for black people. He actually gone around the country and was advocating, trying to get the African-American leadership to support him because of all the discrimination that was taking place in the aftermath of Reconstruction around the country. Mr. McCabe felt Oklahoma should be the state where black people could come and settle and take care of themselves, run their own business, and just be out everybody's way. Of course, he met with a lot of resistance on that. And of course, when the white settlers took over in the legislature, you can see they instituted Jim Crow laws, as were in place in most places in the South to inhibit and to further inhibit the progress of African Americans. But it's important to know that. Next, please. Okay, what's this? Oh, Black Wall. So again, Black Wall Street. As I said earlier, it's important to know that this area of Tulsa, Oklahoma, is something that we should certainly note and recognize. It was Booker T. Washington, the great African American leader, in fact, the most preeminent African American leader of his time, who advocated self-help and business development, economic development, was called to come out to Oklahoma to see this experiment, to see what was going on here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, of all places. And he was the one who dubbed it Black Wall Street or Negro Wall Street at the time, because of what he saw in terms of economic development activity, business activity, the growth and prosperity, the self-help philosophy that was being instituted there and employed there. And so Black Wall Street became just certainly a prototype and something to look at. So what happens is this. I know we're running short on time, just quickly. So with all this prosperity, you can appreciate the fact that many whites, in the aftermath of World War I, there was a lot of unemployment. The oil industry was in somewhat of a recession. So there were a lot of unemployed and underemployed white men who would come to Oklahoma looking for prosperity and work, who were kind of jealous, if you could appreciate, and envious of the fact that across the street, down the road here in Greenwood, all these black folk, with money and prosperity and doing well, and it was certainly it created some envy and underlying racism. And so there was an incident that has happened so often in African American history. An incident occurred in an elevator on May 31st when the young African American shoe shine boy accidentally bumped into the white elevator operator. You know, at the time, elevators had operators. You can just do it run self-help. There's someone actually to run the elevator. And he actually bumped into her, and some other whites witnessed this, and they thought, and so the word went around town, this black man had assaulted this white woman. And no other words can be more fiery and incendiary than the accusation that a black man touched or accosted or assaulted a white woman during that time. So as a result of this, with just that slim evidence of an accident, he was taken and arrested and put in jail. When word spread around the black community that this young man was being held, and there was a lynch mob that was coming to get him, African Americans, men who actually had just served in the war, World War I veterans, put their uniforms on, got their guns, went down to the jail and told the jailers, we're not gonna let these folks hang this boy. And so, and they were confronted by other whites who were intent on lynching this young man, and the gunfire erupted, and in aftermath of that, it became the worst riot, the worst massacre in African American history. And over the next day, overnight to the 31st to May to June the 1st, then 36 blocks of Black Wall Street and the black community of Greenwood were wiped out. Over 300 African American men, women, and children were shot down in the street, and then the other black folk who survived were rounded up and put in a stadium and held captive there as refugees in their own community. And so that, in essence, was they had on one hand the shining example of resistance and resilience of Wall Street and economic development, doing what America, it was the essence of the epitome of the American dream being fulfilled. Black people saying we can do for self, leave us alone, we can take care of ourselves and our community. And yet that being wiped out in overnight, in one night, by just racist jealousy and envy. And it wasn't just a matter of white killing folks. People, the homes were looted, because these were prominent black people, wealthy black folks who had, just nice, from grand pianos to silverware to all type of expensive items in their homes. The homes were looted. And as well as before they were burned. So we had just an American atrocity, if you will, that took place. And
hey, Judge.
Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
But I just wanted to point out something about these people here. The Stradfords owned the hotel that we just went by in the presentation. This guy here was a graduate, the son of a slave, but had gotten a law degree from Indiana University. And he challenged Oklahoma's Jim Crow train car laws. And so he was not very popular with the powers that be in Tulsa and in Oklahoma at all, but he was a very outspoken person. He had about, something like 22 rent houses, was worth about $2 million at that time. And he was able to say what he wanted because he could pay for what he wanted. Eventually, he was blamed. The entire massacre was blamed on Stratford, and he was the only person arrested and charged. And he eventually had to go to Chicago, flee. His bail was paid by his son in Chicago. He was supposed to stay in town, but he fled to Chicago and lived out the rest of his life there. And his family only cleared his name in modern times.
Yes.
Charles and Judge Clifton, we're running out of time, and I know this topic could we could spend a whole day talking about this. And I think the important thing is that we're talking about the past, because we can't move forward unless we acknowledge these things that have occurred. I'm going to toss it back to both of you, but what would kind of be your closing thought for everyone who's listening today, and how we continue to move forward and acknowledge these atrocities that have occurred in the past that have kept people down.
Well, I just quickly, I know we're running short of time. Just quickly, I would just say regarding Tulsa in particular, this year, first of all, there've been efforts over the years to revitalize Black Wall Street. There have been business and economic development initiatives and investment opportunities. This year, but in particular, in the 100th anniversary, there's a mass economic development initiative be taking place that hopefully get held up by the pandemic, but it will be unveiled sometime this year. That actually my brother Eddie is a part of, quite frankly, with a group. So there's hope. I always tell my students, and I would share with the chamber, the two words that describe and epitomize the African American struggle in this country and all endeavors have been resistance and resilience. Resistance and resilience. You heard about Mr. Stratford, you heard of others resisting oppression, but also the resilience to bounce back. So in spite of what we've seen in front of us, whether it's in Black Wall Street or Rosewood, Florida, or across the country, even here in New Haven, the discrimination that's taking place, there's always been the spirit of resilience to bounce back and to fight back. And that's where we are right now. So we learn from the past, we acknowledge the past and address it and don't hide behind it, but also build on that resilience. So we have presently today there's 637,769 Black-owned businesses. Now that's probably just a drop in the bucket compared to white businesses to the 11 million plus, but still, this number is growing. Women-owned businesses as well. We acknowledge the women for sure, but I would just say that quickly. Charles may want to add something too.
I would say the past serves as a model of what can be done. I mean, look at all the success that was had under extreme duress, under extremely violent and destructive forces. You have so many beautiful things that came out of it. So I would say having a climate that is at least not as oppressive, more can and should be done.
Charles Warner and Judge Clifton Graves, thank you so much. Again, I know we could spend and we should spend much more time on this topic. We will have this as a recording. So anyone, if you want to go back, I know there was tons of just great information. I learned a lot as well. You can come back to our website. We'll have it on our YouTube page and put it up. And we'll have both of you back again because there is a lot more for us to delve into. But thank you again for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Garrett,
Thank you for the opportunity.
Garrett, can I quickly just say to
Sure.
Charles and Clifton, on behalf of the council, I just want to thank you guys for taking the time and doing this. It was very, very instructional, and I learned a lot personally. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Everyone take care and be safe. Look forward to doing it again.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Same to you. Thank you. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
All right.